to press record, which was very embarrassing. So give it a couple of seconds. Hello everyone and welcome to When Tomorrow Comes. This is Iceni's regular look at the world of planning and development. My name is Dan Gestico. I'm Iceni's Head Director of Futures. I'd like to welcome you all to this week's vlog. This week we're lucky to be joined by two colleagues working in sort of transport industry. First off, we've got my colleague from Iceni, Lee Talbot. Hello Lee, how are you doing?
Very well, Dan, thank you.
Thanks for coming along. And we've got first time we've got a return guest come back to the show in the shape of Richard Moffat. You may remember our recent episode on cycle parking solutions. How are you doing, Richard?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me back again.
That's nice to see you. It's nice to see you. So, as is kind of traditional, as our regular viewers will know, we'll start things off with Lee giving a bit of a summary on his email, which you would have received hopefully or had a look at this week. Lee, what's happening in the world of car parking?
Thank you, Dan. I think the article this week was kind of the key theme to look at space, and also to kind of look at how we can effectively manage that space in terms of car parking solutions. So we're looking at trying to minimize parking footprint by looking at potential solutions that could be brought forward here and now and are available, whilst within the article we did actually try and look at the future, but we only touched upon that. Rather than kind of emphasize that, we wanted to see how we are looking at solutions now in this time, and therefore we built that into it, and from that we looked at potential automated parking and storage retrieval systems. And through that kind of development, we came across companies that can provide that type of system, and one of those was Richard Moffat and obviously Moffat Parking Solutions. So that's how we came to that. So it kind of key emphasis is on the automated parking, but also kind of taking almost that stress away from the driver as such, rather than the struggle to find that elusive parking space.
Okay, interesting. So I mean, I guess you kind of hit the nail on the head there, really. Space is at a premium on new developments, and car parking can take up a lot of space. Richard, what's your? I mean, Lee alluded to it there a bit there. What solution have you guys been working on to help make the most of sort of constrained space for car parking?
Yeah, so I guess our whole direction and philosophy is born out of what Lee has mentioned. As a company group, we have a background in sort of material handling solutions, and always sort of using innovation to look at more efficient ways of doing things and handling things. And more recently, I suppose, as a company group, we've moved into the world of automation, which is obviously the way things are going. And our sister company, Moffat Automated Storage, actually they design and put together very impressive, comprehensive warehouse management systems. So automated warehouse storage, which is again, it's an aim of increasing storage density, reducing human error, and ultimately cost savings for companies trying to move a lot of goods quickly. And that's really, it's out of that the technology that we are now designing and manufacturing came from. So ultimately our core system, if you like, our SAT system, is, if you can imagine, a huge automated warehouse storage system, kind of multiplied, I suppose, in scale in terms of the individual space, but probably actually reduced in scale in terms of the overall number of spaces. So for example, in the warehousing industry, the system might be catering for 10,000 pallets, a four-dimensional system, going left, right, up and down, moving all throughout a huge warehouse in a fully automated function. One of our systems then, again, completely customized to the customer needs, but it may be anywhere between sort of 12 and 100 car parking spaces typically. So obviously each space is sort of give or take 5.5 meters by 2.5 meters, which is sort of this size of your average car parking space, which is obviously bigger than a pallet space in our sister company. But then we're not at the moment, at least, catering for sort of 10,000 car parking spaces. So really the idea in it is just, as Lee mentioned, that space is at a premium. The closer to any city centre that you get worldwide, the higher that premium is. And when that is the case, there's an opportunity to make better use of the space using what we would call vertical optimization. So essentially, building up instead of out, making better use of a smaller ground footprint, and then taking away, like you said, some of the hassle of finding spaces and so on. So it creates a sort of the system creates a consistency for the user, where they're always parking in the same space on a ground level. They get out and they let the system take over and do the parking from there. Obviously, the alternative, when you look at multi-story car parks, I suppose the challenge with them is that there's a huge amount of wasted space. You need all of your aisles, you need all of your structural pillars. It needs to be lit and maintained in that way. You need ramps to get from one level to another. So while you can get huge multi-story car parks, and the cost and the efficiency of those, we feel is not as productive as it can be. And our system can obviously, once you're above the ground, utilize every sort of square inch that's available. So that's our fully automated system. And again, I suppose our core focus, this isn't a completely new concept. These systems have existed and do exist, manufactured in Germany and quite prevalent in Asia. I was actually in Tokyo a few years ago myself, and these sort of concepts are like on every block there. It's very, very commonplace. And that's a cultural thing as well. There, people are used to driving into these systems, or to let a valet parker take their car and put them into these systems, and there's no reservations about what might happen or how they get it back or whatever. And that's a cultural shift that I think in this part of the Western world, and we're hoping to sort of drive over the coming years. And then I suppose what we're doing, while the concept of sort of vertically optimized parking already exists, the function of our system is actually different than anything else is out there. So we're trying really to find a gap in the market between probably the traditionally more affordable but possibly lesser quality Chinese manufactured system, versus the very highly engineered and more expensive German and other European companies, those systems. And between those, there's sort of a gap where we think we can have a more efficient design, which helps us to save on costs, but not compromise on quality, and then kind of have a price point somewhere in between those two. And that's the market that we're looking to aim at. And I suppose the other key thing that we do, it's not an off-the-shelf product. Every single project that we work on begins with a consultation process with the client, whereby we get an understanding of their requirements, their parameters of dimensions that they have, and then we will take the best system from our range, and probably in the region of take 80% of that system and adapt the last 20% to customize it to exactly their requirements in terms of function and aesthetics and design, so that they have something that fits exactly, rather than trying to squeeze in something just off a standard production line.
I see. Okay. I mean, and within, sorry, Lee, coming back to you for a second, when we're sort of talking to local authorities about sort of car parking solutions, how receptive are they to the idea that people still want to park cars? I mean, surely they must be pushing for the car-free development now, with zero car parking spaces where possible. I mean, I know last time you were on, Rich, we were talking extensively about bike parking, but Lee, coming back to you, is what's the local authority attitude towards car parking? Do they see it as being an outdated concept, or are they still seeing it as being a necessary kind of part of development?
I think it varies between particular boroughs, particular regions, particular cities. For example, in London, the majority of new developments, especially in the centre of London or even in the outer boroughs, look to push for car-free developments. And clearly that then links into, making sure there's sustainable travel, for cycle, for public transport. Whereas maybe if you kind of move out the London-centric as such, and you go more into the shires, then you get a slightly different look at it and how they feel about it. And there's probably still a prevalence for a car-based journey from a development, and therefore you have that. They almost want that need to provide car parking. Whether they're open to solutions, again, is for them, it's probably not something they're necessarily used to, making those type of decisions or looking at those types of options. But I think it's something we need to start looking at and maybe pushing. But again, you've got all these standards which require parking based on what they perceive to be, the uptake of driving within the counties. So you are trying to provide solutions, but at the same time, you've got to make sure that you understand who your audience is. And I think in this instance, it does vary considerably across the regions within the areas.
Okay, I mean, let's fast forward 20 years, guys. I mean, imagine that we're now in a state where the majority of cars are electric and autonomous. Question for you, Richard, is do we still need car parking?
Our view is that there's undoubtedly a move towards a future of shared autonomous vehicles and endless possibilities of ways to reduce traffic on the roads and so on. And we see that as a positive, and it's something that we would very much support. In the meantime, we feel there is going to be a huge lag time where cars as we know them, diesel and petrol, still exist. Then a long overlap to the kind of introduction and the uptake of electric cars, and huge infrastructures to be built in this part of the world to support that. And I think that will go some time, to the point where almost everyone is driving an electric car, at which point then we're probably ready to take the next step. So it's very hard for any of us to predict the future sitting here, but our view certainly is that there is a generation of 20, 30, 40 years left of the headache of car parking still existing, the value of land, meaning that it can be utilized more efficiently to park those cars. And I suppose while it might be nice to be trying to cater your business around what's happening in 20, 30, 40 years time, I suppose we still feel, and from all the conversations that we've had, and like the question that you asked Lee about councils' kind of attitudes towards this, very, very mixed. Where yes, there are people who are trying to say no, let's do zero car developments, but on the other hand, we have some that great, we want to build as many apartments as we can, provide parking, but take up as little space on the ground for that as we can, and the demand for that is still there. So the way that we see it, and that's not that's just our view, having kind of looked at it in lots of different ways, is that there's a generation to go until the shift of the need for car parking starting to reduce.
I would say that that's correct. If you are saying in 20 years time, then yes, potentially there is the infrastructure, but obviously at the moment we don't have that infrastructure in place for autonomous vehicles, for example. But we are moving towards maybe a semi-autonomous vehicle where certain procedures are taken over, and therefore that is taken out to control the driver, but principally the driver will still be the driver. So when it comes to vehicles, I think it's more of a long game as such. I can't imagine the vehicle going away anytime soon. Yes, the actual type of vehicle will change, whether it's electric or so be it, like that. But ultimately, at the moment, there's still going to be a need for parking. It's just how we utilize the space to actually create that parking for those vehicles where it's required, I think, is quite key.
And I think
because I was just going to say that the 20, 30, 40 years, whilst it might seem like a generation, isn't actually that long in terms of built environment. The buildings that we're building now will hopefully still be around in 20, 30, 40 years. Yeah. So being able to adapt and sort of future-proof these spaces for adaptability in future is actually one of those critical considerations. I sort of wonder how we can make use of areas that are allocated for parking in the future. What are your thoughts on how we can kind of adapt these spaces in 20, 30, 40 years' time?
If you're talking about swathes of concrete and blacktop in terms of parking at this moment in time, there is small gains being already undertaken, whether that's for utilization. So, for example, there are large car parks that are being given over, certain parts being given over to additional shopping or additional units for takeaways or coffee or something like that. There is an adaptability to a point, but you're right. It has to be adaptable infrastructure, and I think that's a bit more difficult going forward. I think in terms of how we deal with that, but there are certain things that are being utilised at the moment as solutions to it.
Yeah, and Richard, I suppose the point is about making the most efficient use of the space you've got, and then being able to do something else with it in future. Is that how the system works? Do you see people as sort of using these spaces temporarily? You're almost buying a space for yourself now, for yourself in the future. How does it actually work when you kind of think about these longer term timeframes?
Yeah, well, I think that the beauty of when you get into a machine that is software controlled and software driven is that there's a huge amount of kind of scope there for developing the system itself as time moves forward. So it's not a fixed, necessarily mechanical system that is what it is, and in 10 years very quickly looks outdated. So we've had conversations around the potential in the future to incorporate software where you can maybe book your space in advance or reserve it, or call your car ahead of time, and there's all those kind of considerations. Another huge consideration going forward, and I think probably the more kind of pressing evolution of cars and of parking, is that electric vehicles and charging is a huge requirement. So that is something that we look to build in, that we would have 25 or up to 50% of the spaces in any given system that have charge points included. So again, that's looking at a little bit of future proofing. And then sort of beyond that, if we're getting into the world that's kind of hard to imagine of shared autonomous vehicles and all that type of thing, they will still require hubs. They'll still require charging and cleaning, and I'm not sure if these might be managed by private companies, or how that might work or might look. But they're still going to need a home to go to, and potentially at that point we would be saying that the evolution of systems of ours that may be in place may actually be a better home for them to be managed in than a swathe of tarmac, like Lee has mentioned. So that's probably, to be perfectly honest, as far as we've looked into the future of that. I guess there's more sort of pressing present day issues, but it's a consideration, and there's no doubt that in a generation and beyond that, there is going to be a huge change to the kind of industry and the culture and society as we know it. But for the time being, it's more of a distant thought for us.
Okay, gents, I think that's pretty much all we've got time for today. I'd like to thank you for joining us, Richard. Nice to see you again. Cheers.
And you.
And Lee, thanks very much for coming. Hope to see you again soon as well.
Thank you, Dan.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. Goodbye.
Cheers. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.